Some families have a way of making you feel invisible, even in the brightest rooms. I used to believe that being quiet was the only way to keep the peace, that if I didn't rock the boat, I'd find a place to belong. My name is Harper Lane, and for most of my life, I was the dependable one. The helper, the peacemaker, the afterthought. If you asked my mother, she'd tell you I was a blessing. If you asked my father, he'd probably say I was a responsibility, not a gift. But what do you do when your own reflection starts to feel like a stranger? There were days I thought love was measured in the sacrifices you made for other people. That being a good daughter meant never asking for anything, never making anyone uncomfortable. The funny thing is, you can give away every part of yourself for years, and still not be enough for the people you love. Maybe you know that feeling, the ache of trying to prove your worth to a family that only seems to see you when they need something. It's a quiet kind of loneliness, the kind that seeps into your bones and settles there. I remember a time not so long ago when my family was everything to me. We had our rituals, Sunday pancakes, car rides, with the radio blasting, holidays full of laughter and small disasters. I memorized the sound of my mother's laughter, the way my father would ruffle my hair after a long day. But beneath it all, there was a silence I didn't know how to name, a sense that my role in this story was to support, not to be seen. That maybe if I just tried a little harder, I'd finally earn a seat at the table. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered why your best is never quite enough, I hope you'll stay with me for a while. Because the story I'm about to share isn't just about heartbreak and betrayal. It's about finding your own voice, even when everyone around you wants you to stay silent. It's about learning to believe, even on your loneliest days, that your story matters not because of what you can give, but because of who you are. Sometimes it takes losing everything you thought you needed to discover the strength you always had. Tonight, I want to invite you into my story, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. I want to talk about the quiet kids, the helpers, the ones who are always told to be grateful or not make trouble. I want to talk about the moment my life changed forever, when I realized the cost of silence was too high to pay. If you've ever been made to feel like your love is conditional or your worth is negotiable, this story is for you. Because we all deserve to be seen, and sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is speak. So before we go any further, I want to ask, what would you do if the truth you discovered shattered everything you thought you knew about your family and about yourself? Would you stay silent to keep the peace, or would you risk everything for a chance at freedom? That's the question that changed my life. And if you've ever wondered the same, I hope you'll listen, because what happened next taught me that even the quietest voice can start a revolution. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind you barely remember until something cracks the surface. My phone buzzed just after sunrise. A message from my stepsister Brooke's number, but the words weren't hers. Emergency. Brooke in ICU. Come now. I threw on the first clothes I could find and sped through empty streets, heart thudding against my ribs. The hospital felt colder than winter, humming with worry and fluorescent lights. I was ushered into a waiting room filled with faces I barely knew, each one tense, expectant, as if I had arrived carrying a solution in my back pocket. As the minutes dragged on, I overheard fragments of conversations. Brooke's liver was failing, the prognosis uncertain, and the doctors were running out of options. I barely had time to process the fear before my mother Diana took my hand in hers, her grip urgent, almost desperate. "Harper, you're our only hope," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We need you to get tested. You're the only match left." Suddenly, the room wasn't just filled with worry, it was heavy with expectation. In that moment, I was no longer a daughter, I was a lifeline. I know families everywhere experience emergencies, but I've learned that not every crisis is the same. In some homes, crisis brings people together, inviting compassion, understanding, even forgiveness. But sometimes a family's panic becomes a spotlight, revealing all the cracks that were hidden beneath the surface. I thought of stories I'd read, like the real-life case of Gypsy Rose, where a child's health became the centerpiece of family identity and heartbreakingly control. In those moments, love can get tangled with obligation until you don't know where one ends and the other begins. Standing in that hospital, I realized how quickly love can turn into leverage. The gentle words I craved as a child were replaced by demands, guilt, and a pressure so heavy it was almost physical. There was no time for my questions, only urgent signatures and trembling hands. Looking back, I wish someone had told me, when your worth depends on what you can do for others, it's easy to forget you matter for who you are. That's a lesson too many people, especially in caring families, only learn when it's almost too late. The nurse led me down a bright hallway and I felt everyone's eyes burning into my back, hopeful, desperate, and perhaps a little afraid. I wanted to help, I wanted Brooke to be okay. But something inside me bristled at the way my consent was assumed, my feelings brushed aside. This is what happens, I think, when families confuse sacrifice with love, when doing the right thing is demanded, not offered. In America, we talk about the hero child, the one who saves everyone else. But nobody talks about how much that hero can lose. As I waited for the blood draw, a quiet voice inside asked if I was ready to give another piece of myself away. I remembered a story about a friend from college who gave up her savings to rescue her family's business, only to realize later that gratitude wasn't guaranteed. Her love became a transaction, and it nearly broke her. That day I promised myself to pay attention, to remember that love should never feel like a debt. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pause and ask, am I saying yes because I want to, or because I'm too afraid to say no? And so, as the nurse filled the vials with my blood, I tried to steady my breathing and remind myself I was here because I cared, not because I owed anyone my life. But deep down, I already sensed that this family emergency would uncover truths none of us were prepared to face. I wish I could say things got easier after that, but the hardest part was still to come. What happened next would shake the very foundation of what I thought love and family was supposed to be. You never forget the moment love feels conditional. For me, it was the way my mother's voice echoed down the hospital hallway. When the results didn't come back immediately, her patience unraveled. Harper, do you understand how important this is? She pressed her eyes, darting to the doctors, the nurses, anyone who might overhear. You need to do this for your sister. I nodded, swallowing the ache in my chest. It wasn't the first time I'd felt like a resource instead of a daughter, but it was the first time the entire world seemed to witness it. The air itself buzzed with expectation. That pressure followed me everywhere, through the waiting room, the cafeteria, even the cold hospital restroom where I tried to collect myself. My mother's plea replayed in my mind. Families do whatever it takes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my feelings didn't matter as long as I played the part they'd written for me. In moments like these, it's easy to forget that every person has limits. I remembered stories I'd seen online about other fixer children, those expected to sacrifice over and over until they forget what it means to just be themselves. In America, we talk a lot about individualism, about choosing your own path. But in some families, those old traditions run deep. There are parents who believe love means control and sacrifice is proof of loyalty. I once read about a young man just a few years older than me, whose parents expected him to give up his dream job to care for a sick relative. He did, hoping it would finally earn him their love. But what he got was silence, a debt that could never be repaid. That story lingered in my mind as I looked at my reflection in the hospital mirror. When you're the helper, it's easy to lose yourself in everyone else's needs. You might even tell yourself that your own feelings are selfish, or that asking for space means you don't care. I think that's one of the most common mistakes we make, not just in families, but in friendships too. We mix up love with obligation, believing they're the same. But true love, I've learned, doesn't demand sacrifice. It invites it, and it's always given freely. If you ever feel you're only valuable when you're useful, remember, your worth isn't measured by what you give away. That day, walking back to Brooke's room, I noticed a nurse pause in the hallway, watching the tension unfold. There was a flicker of understanding in her eyes, a silent "I see you" that meant more than any words. Sometimes compassion comes from the most unexpected places, a reminder that even when family lets you down, kindness can still find you. The lesson I carried with me was this: when love turns into leverage, it's okay to step back and protect your heart. You can care deeply for someone and still set boundaries. Both things can be true at once. I took a deep breath, steeling myself as I reached for Brooke's door. The next part of this journey would force me to ask questions I never thought I'd have to face, about loyalty, about identity, and about what it really means to belong. I didn't know it then, but the real test wasn't just about matching blood types or making medical decisions. It was about discovering where love ends and control begins. And that lesson, more than any diagnosis, was about to change everything I thought I knew about family. I remember the afternoon sunlight casting long, tired shadows across the hospital corridor as I wandered back from the lab. My thoughts tangled with worry and confusion. But something small and stubborn inside me craved answers. That's when I found myself at the records desk, almost on autopilot, asking quietly if I could review my own file. The nurse hesitated, but after a moment handed me a folder with my name on it. Sitting in a quiet corner, I flipped through the pages, searching for comfort, but instead I stumbled across something that made my heart thud. Evidence of a test I didn't remember agreeing to. There it was, a record of a DNA compatibility screening dated months before anyone asked me to donate. The signature on the consent form looked like mine, but it wasn't. My hands shook as I traced the letters, wondering how easily a parent's authority can cross a line. I'd heard of similar stories, like the college student in Chicago who discovered her parents had forged her signature for a medical procedure. She never knew about believing it was for her own good. In that moment, I realized love mixed with fear can sometimes justify the unthinkable. I confronted my mother gently that evening, desperate to believe there was a simple explanation. "Mom, did you sign my name on that form?" I whispered, holding up the document. She froze, eyes darting away, then gave a sigh so heavy it filled the room. "You weren't ready to do what needed to be done, Harper. I did what any mother would." Her words stung not because they were loud, but because they came from a place that confused control with care. It made me wonder how many times parents cross boundaries believing it's for love when it's really for certainty. In America, we value consent, privacy, and autonomy, at least we say we do. But in the hush of family secrets, those values can get blurry. There's an old story about a high schooler whose father signed him up for military service, without his knowledge, convinced it would build character. That son forgave his dad eventually, but it took years to rebuild trust. Stories like that remind me boundaries are the backbone of healthy love. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about admitting them and choosing respect over control when we're given the chance. I sat quietly with my anger and confusion, realizing I needed help making sense of it all. That evening, I reached out to a trusted teacher who'd always encouraged me to stand up for myself. She listened without judgment and said something that stayed with me. "Harper, people can love you deeply and still make harmful choices. It's not your job to make sense of their decisions, only to decide what's right for you." I felt a weight lift as I realized setting boundaries wasn't rejection, it was a form of self-respect. As I lay in the hospital cot that night, listening to the distant beeps and soft footsteps in the hallway, I realized the truth wasn't just written on medical records, it was written in how I let people treat me. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I had the right to ask questions. And that I would soon discover was the first real step toward understanding not just my family, but myself. What came next would test my courage in ways I never imagined, pushing me to redefine what family could mean and what love was truly supposed to feel like. Sometimes the hardest truth is the one you find buried in plain sight. The next morning, my doctor called me into his office, a folder resting on his lap like something fragile. He spoke carefully, his voice lower than usual. "Harper, we've run your results twice now. The markers just don't align the way we'd expect." He paused, then turned the screen toward me, showing 2 color-coded charts, one for me, one for Brooke. "You're not a genetic match," he said gently. "And Harper, this suggests you aren't biologically related." My breath caught. The words didn't register at first. I stared, waiting for the world to right itself, but nothing made sense anymore. In America, many people discover life-altering truths through DNA tests, sometimes by accident, sometimes searching for roots. I thought of the stories I'd seen online, like the woman who learned at 30 that the people who raised her were not her birth parents, thanks to a home DNA kit. Some find new connections, others only more questions. For me, the revelation felt like my whole childhood had been built on shifting sand. I wasn't just a donor who didn't match. I was a daughter whose place in her own family was suddenly uncertain, suspended between love and a lie. As I left the doctor's office, I felt numb. I thought of all the moments that had never quite made sense. The offhand comments about how different I looked, the family photos, where I felt like the odd one out the way. I sometimes wondered if I was just passing through, not really belonging. Now those fragments came together like puzzle pieces, spelling out a truth I never asked for. The pain was sharp, but under it was a strange, quiet clarity. Sometimes secrets are not meant to protect us, they're meant to keep us in our place. I reached out to an online support group that afternoon, desperate for reassurance that I wasn't alone. There I read dozens of stories from people who had uncovered hidden adoptions or donor origins. Some were angry, some were relieved. Most were like me, hurt but determined to build an honest life from whatever pieces were left. The lesson echoed in every post: your identity doesn't disappear just because your story changes. The love you have to give and the love you deserve are still real, even if your family isn't what you thought. That night I sat quietly on the edge of my hospital bed, the glow of my phone illuminating a path forward. I realized I had a choice: to let this discovery define me by its pain, or to let it become a door to something new. My family's secrets had shaped my life, but they didn't have to decide my future. The truth, painful as it was, set me free from expectations I could never meet. What came next would be hard, but for the first time I saw the possibility of living life as my truest self. The next step I knew would not be about uncovering more secrets, but about finding my voice. It was time to decide not just who I was, but what I wanted, what I needed from the people I called family, and from myself. With every breath I reminded myself, it's not where you come from that matters most, but where you're willing to go from here. And as morning crept in, I was ready to begin again, even if it meant starting from scratch. There's a particular kind of silence that settles in after a revelation heavier than anger or grief. In those first days I walked through the hospital in a daze, moving from hallway to hallway, as if searching for my old life in the corners. I thought about telling Brooke, but how do you explain to your sister that you're not really sisters? Not in the way everyone believed. I saw the worry in her eyes when I entered her room, and I wanted to reassure her, but I realized I didn't have the words, not yet. Sometimes the hardest part of the truth is carrying it alone. It's easy to assume that when families break, it's always loud and dramatic. But sometimes it's the quiet that hurts most. I kept my secret for days, unsure whether sharing it would bring relief or only deepen the pain. I read stories of others who'd held back, like the college freshman who learned at orientation that she was adopted but waited months to tell her parents she knew. She carried her knowledge like a shield, not yet ready to risk the fallout. We all hold on to secrets, hoping they might protect us, but they often only delay the healing. In America, we often praise those who speak up, who confront problems head-on. But there's little guidance for those of us who need time to process, to mourn quietly, before we find our voices. The pressure to be brave can feel overwhelming, especially when you're not sure what bravery even looks like. For me, it looked like scribbling thoughts in a notebook, calling a helpline, just to hear another human say, "You're not alone." Some days, my courage was nothing more than getting out of bed, holding myself together while the world went on as usual. Looking back, I wish I'd known that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's just preparation, a space to gather strength before taking the next step. A therapist once told me healing isn't a race, Harper. It's a process, and it belongs to you. That idea stayed with me. The small lesson I learned was this: you're allowed to take your time. You can feel unsure, even afraid, and still be moving forward. The important thing is to honor your own pace, not the expectations of others. But secrets have a way of growing heavier the longer you carry them. I started to notice how my silence changed me. I was more guarded, less present, afraid that if I opened up, everything would unravel. Even in small moments, like laughing with a friend or sharing coffee with a nurse, I felt a barrier between who I was and who I pretended to be. It reminded me that truth is a bridge, not a wall. And if you want to cross into something better, you have to be willing to build it one honest word at a time. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the hospital window, I realized I was ready to try. I didn't know exactly how to start or what the outcome would be, but I knew I couldn't keep living in between. If my story was going to change, I would have to be the one to speak. And with that quiet decision, the weight of my secret began to lift just enough to let hope in. The next part of my journey would mean facing my family with the truth, no matter what came after. It's strange how a single conversation can feel heavier than a lifetime of silence. When I finally decided to speak, my heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. I asked my mother and Brooke to meet me in a quiet corner of the hospital's family lounge, away from the swirl of nurses and visitors. I took a deep breath and told them what the doctors had found. I'm not a genetic match. Brooke, I'm not your biological sister. The words came out trembling, but the relief of honesty was immediate, even if their reactions were not what I hoped for. My mother's face turned pale, lips pressed tightly together as if holding back a storm. Brooke stared at me, confusion flickering across her eyes, then something softer, maybe sadness, maybe understanding. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then my mother's voice broke the stillness. We did what we thought was right. You needed a family, and Brooke needed a miracle. I listened, realizing she believed love could justify secrets. I saw both guilt and longing for forgiveness. In America, family means many things, but sometimes it's used to cover up what we're afraid to face. I've read about people whose lives were turned upside down by hidden truths. There was a story on the news about a man who learned at 40 he'd been adopted. His mother confessed on her deathbed, thinking it would free them both. Instead, it left him grieving the years of unspoken distance. The lesson there and in my own life is that honesty, no matter how hard, is what allows real healing to begin. We tell ourselves that secrets protect others, but usually they only create more wounds. After that day, something subtle shifted between us. My mother began to look at me not just with regret, but with vulnerability. Brooke, though shaken, reached for my hand and squeezed it. "You're still my sister," she whispered. It was the first time I truly believed love could survive the loss of illusion. Sometimes we imagine that truth will destroy the bonds we've built, but often it simply changes their shape. Our family would never be the same, but there was a new honesty in our pain, a willingness to start again from where we really were. The small lesson I learned was that courage isn't just about standing up for yourself. It's about risking change for the sake of something better. Speaking up was terrifying, but it was also the only way to clear space for real connection to grow. I realized that love to be real can't depend on keeping secrets. It has to be strong enough to withstand the truth, even when it hurts. As we left the lounge together, I felt a quiet hope rising inside me. We had a long road ahead, but for the first time, I sensed it might lead somewhere new, somewhere honest. The next part of my journey would be about rebuilding, learning what it meant to belong on my own terms, and discovering the power of choosing who I wanted to become. Rebuilding life after a family secret is a lot like learning to walk again. You move slowly, unsure of your footing, afraid that the ground might give way. I found myself doubting everything I once took for granted. The family dinners, the holiday photos, the way my mother used to tuck me in at night. Were these moments real, or just another layer over the truth? Every small kindness suddenly felt complicated. Yet even as I grieved the loss of certainty, I noticed something new in our home, a sense of honesty, raw and sometimes awkward but more real than anything that came before. Brooke struggled too. There were days she wouldn't speak, shutting the door between us as she processed her own pain. But sometimes she'd leave a mug of tea outside my room or send a text that simply read, "Thinking of you." In those gestures, I found comfort, a reminder that bonds can survive even the most difficult revelations. I read about others who had been through similar journeys. One woman I met online shared how after learning she was adopted, she built a new relationship with her parents, based not on blood but on trust. It wasn't easy, but it was honest, and that made all the difference. It's easy to think that healing happens all at once, but in reality, it's a process of tiny steps. I started seeing a counselor, someone who helped me unravel my anger and sadness without judgment. My mother joined me for a few sessions, and for the first time I heard her say she was sorry, not just for what happened, but for not listening sooner. That apology, though it didn't erase the past, made forgiveness possible. We both learned that rebuilding trust requires time, vulnerability, and the willingness to let go of who we thought we were. In American culture, there's a belief that family is everything, but more and more people are learning that sometimes you have to create your own definition of family. I saw this in the support group I joined, where people from all walks of life shared how they found belonging after being rejected, lied to, or misunderstood. One man described how he created a chosen family out of friends and mentors, people who saw him for who he truly was. That gave me hope. The lesson was clear: you are allowed to seek connection and love beyond the people who share your DNA. Slowly, our home found a new kind of normal. It wasn't perfect, there were setbacks, tears, moments of anger, but it was honest. And in honesty, there is room for real love to grow. As I learned to forgive both myself and my family, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. Sometimes you have to let go of the family you were given in order to find the family you choose. And as I prepared to step out into the world on my own, I knew that the next part of my journey would be about building that new life, one rooted in truth, acceptance, and the courage to keep going. Finding a sense of belonging after losing your place in the family you thought you knew is both daunting and liberating. I started exploring what it meant to create my own circle, people who valued me for my heart, not my history. I joined a local book club, made new friends at work, and reached out to a distant cousin I'd always admired. The warmth I found wasn't instant, but it was real. These new connections grew from honest conversations and shared laughter, not obligation. I realized that the family you build for yourself can be every bit as meaningful as the one you're born into. My journey reminded me of a story I read online about a man named David, who was estranged from his biological parents for years. Instead, he created a family out of friends, neighbors, and even co-workers who supported him unconditionally. He hosted holiday dinners for orphans, by choice people who, like him, needed a sense of home beyond blood ties. His story taught me that belonging is not just about ancestry. It's about shared values, mutual respect, and the courage to reach out when you feel alone. Family, I learned, can be found in the most unexpected places. As I spent more time with people who saw the real me, I noticed my confidence returning. I became more comfortable sharing my story, no longer hiding behind shame or secrecy. Friends responded with empathy and sometimes with stories of their own, tales of betrayal, forgiveness, and new beginnings. The lesson was simple, yet profound. Vulnerability is the bridge that turns strangers into family. By opening my heart, I invited connection, and by trusting others, I discovered just how resilient love can be. Even my relationship with Brooke began to shift in small but hopeful ways. She started attending support group meetings with me, slowly letting down her guard. Our conversations were awkward at first, but we found common ground in our shared pain and hope for healing. Through Brooke, I learned that rebuilding trust is possible when both people are willing to try, even if it takes time. The journey was far from easy, but with each honest conversation, our bond grew stronger. The family I was creating was not perfect, but it was real, and it was mine. Looking back, I see now that losing my place in my old family made room for something better, an authentic life filled with chosen connections and genuine belonging. I realized I didn't need to hold on to old wounds or outdated expectations to be whole. The freedom to define family for myself was a gift I never expected, but one I cherish every day. As I look toward the future, I felt ready to help others find their voice too. The next part of my journey would be about sharing what I'd learned, giving hope to those who still felt unseen, and encouraging them to step into the light. Looking back on this journey, I see a story that's more than just pain or loss. It's a testament to the power of truth, choice, and belonging. I learned that family secrets can wound us, but honesty has the power to heal. I discovered that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper that helps you keep going when you'd rather hide. Through heartbreak, I found the freedom to define my own family, surround myself with people who value me, and step into a life built on honesty and real connection. Each step facing the pressure to sacrifice, uncovering uncomfortable truths, setting boundaries, and speaking out taught me something new about love. I realized that love shouldn't be a transaction or a burden. It should be an invitation given and received freely. I saw firsthand that forgiveness takes time, and rebuilding trust is a slow, patient process. Yet even when old ties break, there's always the chance to build something new, something chosen and cherished. The journey isn't easy, but every small act of honesty can lead to healing for you and for those you care about. I hope my story reminds you that you are more than the secrets or burdens your family may place upon you. You have a right to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved just as you are. If you've ever doubted your worth or felt like an outsider in your own life, know that you're not alone. There is a place for you in this world, a place you can build with your own hands, heart, and courage. Sometimes the family we find along the way is even stronger than the one we're born into. If my journey resonated with you or helped you feel less alone, I'd love to hear your story. Share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments below. I read every single one, and you never know who might find hope in your words. If you believe stories like this can make a difference, please like this video and subscribe for more conversations about healing, honesty, and building the life you deserve. Together, we can create a space where no one has to hide and where everyone is welcome, no matter where they come from. Thank you for spending this time with me. Your voice matters, your story matters, and no matter what you've been through, there's always a new beginning waiting for you. Let's keep moving forward together.